The ugly millionaire was rejected until the poor maid's baby said something impossible. Christmas Eve settled over New York City like a cold, shimmering blanket woven from millions of tiny lights. Cars rolled slowly across streets dusted with thin layers of snow, while families inside bright restaurants filled the night with laughter, chatter, and flashes of red scarves. But in a quiet corner of Bellevue Prime, a fine dining spot favored by Manhattan's elite, a man sat alone, as though he were the only piece that didn't fit the warm, glittering picture. His name was Ethan Marlowe, 38 years old, founder of a multi-million-dollar tech company. Successful by every societal measure, yet carrying a lifelong insecurity that no wealth could erase, an ordinary appearance and years of being judged for it. Even tonight, a night meant for joy, only deepened wounds that had never truly healed. In front of him, 2 untouched wine glasses reflected the candlelight. Across the empty seat lay a neatly folded napkin where Rosalind Hale, a polished and stunning attorney, had sat just minutes earlier before walking away. Her words still echoed. "Ethan, you're a good man, but you're just not my type physically." A clean cut, cold, sharp, and final. Vanessa stood, adjusted her tailored coat, and left under the curious stares of nearby diners. Meanwhile, Ethan remained still, trying to maintain composure, though something inside him tightened painfully. The festive atmosphere around him only made his loneliness sharper. The clinking glasses and warm conversations felt like sounds from a world he was never invited into. And in that moment, Ethan was certain this would be the worst Christmas Eve of his life. And just when Ethan believed nothing could salvage that Christmas Eve, something unexpected happened. Something so small, he almost missed it. Amid the hum of conversations around the restaurant, he felt a tiny tug at the sleeve of his coat. At first, he thought he imagined it, but when he looked down, he found a pair of wide, curious eyes staring directly at him. A little girl, no more than 3, stood beside his table, cheeks pink from the cold, soft curls brushing her shoulders, her red Christmas dress faintly scented like candy. She clutched a worn-out stuffed bear with one crooked ear, clearly her most treasured possession. "Mister," she said in a tiny, clear voice, "why are you sad on Christmas Eve?" A question only a child could ask. A question that sliced through walls Ethan had built for years. He blinked, heart skipping a beat. No one else that night had cared enough to notice him. No one had looked long enough to see the quiet ache tightening inside him. Yet this little stranger saw it instantly. He tried to smile, but it came out uneven. I don't know, kiddo." The girl tilted her head, as if analyzing him deeply. Then she stepped closer, placing her stuffed bear gently near his hand. "My name is Mia. Mommy says nobody should be sad on Christmas." Before Ethan could respond, a flustered voice called from behind. "Mia, sweetheart, I told you to stay in the kitchen." A young woman hurried over, hair tied hastily, face slightly flushed from working non-stop. Her uniform identified her as part of the cleaning staff. She grabbed her daughter's hand, bowing apologetically. "I'm so sorry, sir. She didn't mean to bother you. I'm Grace Jenkins. I work here. I couldn't get a sitter tonight, so she had to stay with me." And Ethan shook his head softly, his voice gentler than before. "It's all right, really. She actually made me feel better." Grace looked up, startled, clearly not expecting that answer. Meanwhile, Mia beamed, her eyes sparkling like Christmas lights. "Do you want to have dinner with me and Mommy? Mommy always shares her food." Mia's invitation was so innocent that Ethan had no idea how to react. Part of him wanted to decline politely. After all, he was a customer, and they were staff. But another part, the part that had lived in quiet loneliness for years, stirred gently. And it was that part that made him nod before he even realized it. "Okay, If your mom doesn't mind." Grace widened her eyes, flustered. No, I guess it's all right. If you don't mind." Ethan stood, feeling as though he had just made the boldest decision of his life. Mia grabbed his hand and led him toward the back door that opened into the staff kitchen. Her tiny footsteps tapped lightly against the old tiles, carrying a warmth he didn't know he needed so badly. The kitchen was nothing like the elegant dining room upstairs. Here, steam rose from enormous pots. Staff hurried between stations. Knives clacked rhythmically against cutting boards, and chefs shouted orders across the room. In the middle of this chaos, Ethan, wearing his expensive winter coat, looked entirely out of place. Head chef Miguel Ortiz spotted Grace and frowned. "Grace, you brought a Wait, is he actually a customer?" Before Grace could answer, Mia tugged at Miguel's apron. "Chef Miguel, this is my friend. I invited him for dinner." Miguel sighed, but his face softened. He looked Ethan over, then gave a reluctant nod, his version of approval. "All right then, if you're okay with our food, you can stay." Grace pointed to a small stainless steel table against the wall, the spot where she usually ate during breaks. "You can sit. It's not fancy, but I hope it's okay." Ethan smiled. "No, this is perfect." They divided the meal into 3 tiny portions. Grace poured water into the thin plastic cups, then all 3 of them sat down at the small table in the corner of the kitchen. They began to eat. Those simple dishes, when Ethan lifted the first bite to his mouth, carried something he had long forgotten. The taste of a family meal. Not because the food was good, but because of the sincerity woven into every small action of the mother and daughter. Mia ate while talking nonstop, about her old teddy bear named Benny, about her drawing class at daycare, about how she hoped Santa would bring her a new doll, but maybe next year, because Mom said we don't have enough money yet. Grace listened as she gently adjusted her daughter's scarf, occasionally sending a shy glance toward Ethan, afraid that Mia's innocent rambling might annoy him. But Ethan listened to every word, missing nothing, as if each sentence were precious. Grace ate slowly, and now and then she quietly looked at Ethan. She couldn't understand why a man like him would sit here, sharing a modest meal, listening to her daughter talk about such small things. Ethan could have gone to any high-end restaurant in the city. "May I ask you something?" Grace finally spoke, cautious but sincere. Ethan turned to her, his voice gentle. "Go ahead." "Why would someone like you spend Christmas Eve having dinner alone?" The question made him pause. Ethan set his spoon down, his eyes fixed on the plastic table, a soft breath slipping out. "I had an appointment," he said, his voice rough. "But she didn't want to see me anymore?" Grace frowned. "She left you sitting alone?" Ethan let out a faint laugh, both fragile and bitter. "Worse, she turned me down before I even had the chance to sit." Grace went silent. She understood what it felt like to be seen as not enough, to be judged in a single glance. She had lived through that far too many times. "I'm truly sorry for you," she said softly. "It's all right," Ethan murmured, shaking his head. "Maybe I'm used to it." Mia suddenly stopped eating. She tilted her head, looking at Ethan with her wide, round eyes. "That lady was silly. Uncle Ethan is handsome. I think he's handsome." Ethan froze. Something soft and warm rose in his chest, blurring his vision. He lowered his head to hide it. But Grace saw everything. And for the first time, she understood. This man, despite having everything, was lonely in a way that carved deeper than words could reach. After their simple dinner, the small staff kitchen felt strangely peaceful. Though knives clacked and pots clanged in the distance, the corner where the 3 of them sat seemed like a world of its own, quiet, warm, and untouched by the rush around them. But Grace's shift wasn't over yet. She stood and wiped her hands on her apron. I need to get back to work. I still have almost 2 hours left." Mia immediately clung to her mother's hand. "Mommy, I want to stay with Mr. Ethan." Grace crouched down. "No, sweetheart, you need to stay here and behave. No more running around, okay?" Before Mia could protest, Ethan spoke gently. "If you'd like, I can watch her. I'll stay right here. I won't go anywhere." Grace looked at him as if he had said something unbelievable. Before she could respond, Chef Miguel chimed in. "I can keep an eye on them. They're right here in the kitchen, under my nose." Grace hesitated for a long moment, torn between worry and a trust she hadn't expected to feel so quickly. At last, she nodded. "All right, but Mia, you listen to Mr. Ethan and Chef Miguel. Understand?" "Yes," Mia cheered, immediately climbing into Ethan's lap as though she'd known him forever. Grace left them there, bathed in the warm yellow light of the kitchen. At first, Mia was drowsy, leaning against him while playing with the expensive watch on his wrist. But soon her small head grew heavier, and she drifted to sleep, clutching her bear, Benny. Ethan looked down at the tiny face resting against his chest. Something softened inside him, a feeling both familiar and foreign, as if he had once had this, or had wished for it his entire life. Miguel glanced over and chuckled. "She trusts you, you know. She doesn't fall asleep on just anyone." Ethan answered only with a quiet smile. When Grace returned at the end of her shift, the first thing she saw was Mia asleep in Ethan's arms, his own head resting wearily against the wall. The sight made her stop in her tracks. Not because she feared waking Mia, but because something warm and unexpected stirred in her chest. She had never seen anyone look at her daughter that way. Ethan startled awake and apologized quickly. "Sorry, I think I dozed off." Grace smiled softly. "It's okay. Thank you for watching her." Ethan carried Mia to the car, placing her in the back seat with the same care one would give to something precious. Standing by the open door, Grace looked at him and finally asked, "Why? Why are you doing all of this?" Ethan took a long breath, then answered with a sincerity he rarely allowed himself. "Because it's been a long time since anyone treated me like I mattered. Not for my money, not for my company, just for me." And on that quiet Christmas Eve, something in the lives of all three began to shift forever. Grace opened the door of her old car, her hand still trembling slightly after the long night. She turned back to Ethan, the man standing there under the soft yellow glow of the parking lot lights, looking both strong and strangely fragile. She took a breath, gathering every bit of courage she had. If you don't have any plans," Grace said softly, "you can come over tomorrow for Christmas dinner. It's nothing fancy, just a simple meal, but my door is always open for you." Ethan froze, as if something had just caught his breath and held it still. "Grace, are you serious?" His voice was rough, as though he feared even a small breeze might erase her invitation. Grace smiled, a small, gentle smile warm enough to melt the December cold. "I wouldn't joke about that." Ethan tried to speak, but the words simply wouldn't come. He could only look at her, speechless. Grace gave a small nod, then stepped into the car and closed the door. She drove off, the taillights fading into the night. Ethan stayed there, alone in the chilly open lot. But for the first time in many years, the cold didn't bite into him anymore. Christmas Eve ended in gentle quiet, but Ethan's heart was far from quiet. When he returned to his high-rise luxury apartment, everything felt strange. The elegant furniture, the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Central Park, the enormous bed, everything seemed emptier than ever. As he lay down, his mind replayed the moment Mia slept peacefully in his arms. And her innocent question, "Mr. Ethan, are you happy tomorrow?" No one had ever asked him that before, and Ethan knew if there was any place he wanted to be on Christmas Day, it was exactly where Grace and Mia were. The next morning, the New York air was so cold that each breath turned into pale white clouds. Ethan drove through Brooklyn, deeper into an old neighborhood where the brick walls had long faded with time. He parked far from Grace's apartment and walked the rest of the way, his expensive shoes catching dust from the worn pavement. On the pale blue steps of the small apartment building, Mia sat curled up, two little pigtails swaying in the wind. When she spotted Ethan at the end of the alley, she shot up like a spring. "Mr. Ethan! See, I told Mommy you would come." Ethan laughed, bending down to catch her fierce hug. Grace appeared behind her, still holding a kitchen towel. She froze for a moment when she saw him, really standing there in the narrow, weathered alley of her neighborhood. You actually came." "Grace," Ethan said softly, "I told you I would." She looked away, as if unaccustomed to someone keeping a promise to her. "Come in. It's small, but I hope you don't mind." The apartment had only 2 rooms, a living room combined with a tiny kitchen, and the shared bedroom where mother and daughter slept. Everything was old, but spotless in a way that stirred something inside Ethan, a kind of warmth he had never found in any luxury penthouse. He looked around not to judge, but to understand. "It smells amazing," Ethan said with a smile. "What are you cooking?" "Just a simple lunch," Grace replied, suddenly shy. "Rice, beans, ground beef, and some vegetables. Sounds perfect?" Mia hurried around the apartment, proudly showing Ethan everything, from her worn Bear Benny to the childlike paintings taped on the walls. Ethan listened to every word as though she were inviting him into her favorite little universe. When they sat at the small plastic table, there were no tablecloths, no fine glasses, just 3 people, 3 plastic plates, and the warmth of Christmas. Grace glanced at the food, then at Ethan. "I know it's not much, but I hope you'll enjoy it." Ethan shook his head gently. "Grace, this is the first real Christmas meal I've had in years." Grace didn't reply, but her eyes softened. After the meal, Ethan reached into his coat pocket and took out a small red package tied with a white ribbon. "Mia, this is for you." The girl opened it carefully, her eyes widening as she saw a brand new doll inside, its golden hair soft and shining. "It's really mine?" "It's yours." Mia threw her arms around Ethan, hugging him tightly. "Thank you, Mr. Ethan. I love it." Grace turned away quickly, but Ethan noticed the slight tremble in her shoulders. It wasn't gratitude for the gift. It was the relief of seeing her daughter truly happy, even if just for a moment. After that Christmas Day, the lives of the 3 began to change quietly. No grand announcements, no dramatic shifts, just a gentle slide into something that felt as if it had always been meant to happen. Ethan no longer disappeared into long, empty evenings in his luxurious apartment. Instead, almost every day as Grace's shift neared its end, he would appear at a small table in the corner of the restaurant, order a single black coffee, and wait. No invitation needed, no explanation offered. He came because he wanted to. Mia was always the first to spot him. "Mr. Ethan!" She squealed like a tiny bell, sprinting straight into his arms. Grace would shake her head, half embarrassed, half amused. "Mia, don't run in the restaurant." But the little girl never listened, and Ethan never complained. In the beginning, Grace kept her distance. She didn't understand why a millionaire, a man from a world so far from hers, would bother with her and her daughter. But as time passed, her defenses softened. Ethan never pitied them, never showed off, never tried to impress. He simply stayed. And somehow, his presence made her small, heavy life feel a little less burdensome. Some afternoons, Ethan picked Mia up from daycare. The moment she saw him, she sprinted from the gate, backpack bouncing. "I knew you'd come." Ethan would smile, catching her as though it were the most natural thing in the world. They walked through the park, shared ice cream on days warm enough, and traded stories, small ones, silly ones, but the kind that made them laugh all the way home. Grace watched all of it, feeling something warm and something frightening. One night after a long shift, Ethan drove Grace and Mia home. When Mia ran into the bedroom, Grace stood in the kitchen doorway, twisting a towel in her hands. Then, unexpectedly, she asked, "Ethan, why are you doing all this? You don't owe us anything." Ethan leaned against the counter, exhaling softly. "Grace, I'm not doing it out of obligation. I'm doing it because I like being here. I like being with you two." Grace froze. "But you have a whole different life. Money, opportunities, and we're just—" Ethan interrupted gently but firmly. "I know what I have, but I've never had a place where I felt like I belonged." Grace looked down to escape his gaze, but her heart was beating so fast she wondered if he could hear it. Another evening, after Mia fell asleep, Grace made Ethan a cup of tea. They sat beside the small window overlooking the quiet alley. Grace told him about her past, about Derek, Mia's father, the man who vanished the moment he learned she was pregnant. About nights juggling 2 jobs to afford milk and tiny shoes. About how she once believed she would raise Mia alone for the rest of her life. Ethan listened, without interrupting, without asking the kind of questions that deepen wounds. When she finished, he said softly, "You didn't do anything wrong. Derek left because he was weak, not because you weren't enough." The way he said it, not with pity, not with judgment, made Grace's throat tighten. "Sometimes I think, only Mia needs me," she whispered. Ethan looked straight at her, sincerity shining so clearly it startled her. "No, Grace, I need you too." That sentence, simple but heavy, etched something permanent inside her. And even though they never named the feelings growing between them, both knew they were stepping into something beautiful and terrifying, something they had been missing for far too long. The closeness between Ethan, Grace, and Mia kept growing, so gently, so naturally, that none of them realized how deeply they had become part of each other's lives. Then came an invitation, a simple one on the surface, yet destined to be the spark for a heartbreak none of them were prepared for. One evening over dinner at Grace's apartment, Ethan inhaled deeply and said, "Grace, there's a charity gala in a few days. It's a bit formal, but I want you and Mia to come with me." Grace almost dropped her plate. "Ethan, I can't go to something like that. I don't belong in that world." "You belong anywhere I am." His voice was soft but unwavering. Grace flushed. She looked away, her heart pounding too loudly to ignore. After days of hesitation, she finally agreed. Ethan took care of everything, a simple but beautiful dress for Grace, a sparkly red one for Mia. Nothing extravagant, nothing overwhelming, just enough to give them confidence without pressure. On the night of the gala, when Ethan arrived and Grace stepped out of the apartment, he nearly forgot how to breathe. She was stunning. No fancy jewelry, no heavy makeup, just Grace herself, warm, genuine, and radiant. "Why are you looking at me like that?" she asked, flustered. "Because I can't look away," Ethan answered honestly, making her heart stumble. Mia ran out with her new dress and twirled. "Do I look pretty, Mr. Ethan?" "You're the prettiest one here." The three left the small neighborhood, stepping into a world of gleaming lights, luxury cars lined before a Manhattan hotel, and guests dressed like they stepped out of magazines. Grace held Mia's hand tightly. Her heart raced. "Just walk beside me," Ethan murmured, a reassuring hand on her back. "You'll be fine." But the moment they entered the ballroom, the world swallowed them whole. Sparkling gowns, judging eyes, whispers loud enough to sting. "Who is she? He brought a child? Look at that dress." Grace tried to pull her hand away, but Ethan held on. "Don't let them scare you. I'm here." But she was already trembling. Then a familiar voice cut through the crowd. "Ethan? Is that really you?" Vanessa Monroe, Ethan's ex, glamorous, wealthy, social media famous, approached with a smirk that wasn't really a smile. "You never mentioned you'd be bringing someone special." Ethan subtly stepped between her and Grace. "Vanessa, this is Grace and her daughter, Mia." Vanessa's eyes swept over Grace like a scanner evaluating defects. "Oh, how interesting. I didn't know you liked such an ordinary look." Grace felt heat bloom in her cheeks, not admiration, but humiliation. "Vanessa, stop," Ethan warned. "I'm just curious," she said innocently, though her tone dripped venom. "I mean, someone like her with you, doesn't it look a little mismatched?" People nearby chuckled. Grace bowed her head, gripping Mia's hand. "Ethan, I want to go home." "Grace, don't, please." Her voice cracked, and even though Ethan tried to hold on, she slipped her hand away, gathered Mia in her arms, and fled the ballroom before the tears could fall. Ethan turned back to Vanessa, fury blazing in his eyes. "You just did the worst thing you could have done to me." But Vanessa only blinked, clueless. Ethan didn't waste another second. He left everything behind, the lights, the whispers, the polished lies, and ran after Grace. But when he reached the parking area, a taxi carrying Grace and Mia was already pulling away. Ethan stood alone under the cold Manhattan sky, his hand still empty where hers should have been. And he knew. He had just lost the most important thing he'd ever found. That night, Ethan barely slept. He sat alone in his gleaming apartment, surrounded by luxury but suffocating in emptiness. For the first time in years, wealth felt like a cage. He had tried to open the door to his world for Grace, but he had forgotten that his world had never been kind to outsiders. And now he had hurt the one person he never wanted to hurt. The next morning, Ethan woke with a painful clarity. He couldn't let things end like this. He needed Grace to understand. He chose her and Mia, not the shallow people from last night. He drove to Brooklyn, parked in the usual spot, and walked through the narrow alley toward Grace's apartment. The winter wind stung his face, but it was nothing compared to the ache twisting in his chest. He knocked. Once, twice, 3 times. Finally, the door opened. Grace stood there, tired, eyes swollen from crying, gripping the doorframe like she needed it to keep steady. "Ethan, what are you doing here?" Her voice was hoarse, more exhausted than angry. He swallowed pride, shame, everything, and spoke with raw honesty. "I'm here to apologize. I know I hurt you, and I don't have an excuse." Grace looked away, trying to steady her voice. "Ethan, you don't understand. I've spent my whole life trying not to feel small around anyone. But last night, I felt crushed." "Grace?" They looked at me like I didn't belong, like I was some mistake. And the worst part was seeing you stand there and say nothing. Ethan closed his eyes, the pain hitting him sharply. "I know, and I regret it every second since you walked out." Silence. Ethan stepped closer, voice breaking. "I didn't stay quiet because I was ashamed of you. I stayed quiet because I was afraid that if I defended you too strongly, they'd use it to hurt you. I thought I was protecting you, but instead, I hurt you more." Grace tightened her grip on the doorframe. "Ethan, I don't fit in your world. I never will." "Then I'll leave that world." Grace's head snapped up, her breath catching as though the ground beneath her had shifted. What did you just say? Ethan stood tall, eyes steady and clear. I don't need the parties, the approval, the fake friends, or the flashy events. I only need you and Mia. If my world hurts you, then I don't want it. Grace's lips parted, but no sound came out. Ethan lowered his voice, filled with sincerity that could not be faked. Grace, for the first time in my life, I feel like I belong somewhere, and that place is beside you, if you'll let me. A minute passed, then another. Grace looked away, fighting the tears. Ethan, I'm scared. I'm scared you'll leave one day. Scared Mia will be heartbroken. I'm not going anywhere. His voice was firm. You promise? She whispered. I swear. To you, to Mia, to myself. At that moment, a small voice sounded behind Grace. Mr. Ethan, you're really here? Mia appeared, rubbing her eyes, still in her tiny pajamas. She ran forward and wrapped her arms around Ethan's leg like it was the most natural thing in the world. Ethan knelt and held her tightly. I always come back, sweetheart. Grace watched, and something inside her softened in a way she could no longer resist. Finally, she opened the door wider. Ethan, come in. Just 3 words, but to Ethan they were a second chance he would never lose again. From the moment Ethan stepped into Grace's apartment after that tear-stained morning, their lives began shifting into a new rhythm, gentle, careful, and filled with unspoken yet unmistakable tenderness. No one declared they were starting over. No one labeled the relationship, but both tried, slowly and sincerely. During the first weeks, Ethan kept a respectful distance, not too far for Grace to feel abandoned, but not too close to overwhelm her. Every evening he brought simple meals, warm soup, sandwiches, or things Grace liked but rarely allowed herself to buy. You don't have to do this, Grace said for the 10th time. I know, Ethan replied with a half-smile. But I want to? Mia was always the bridge between them. She chattered, laughed, dragged Ethan to the floor to play dolls or color. Soon the wall held a new drawing, 3 people holding hands, with a giant heart in the middle. Grace stared at that drawing for a long time, and when Ethan saw it, something in him tightened with a longing he couldn't name. Something inside her softened. One Saturday afternoon, snow began to fall. Grace was hanging laundry by the door when she saw Ethan walking toward her building. The cold wind blew snow onto his hair and coat. Grace crossed her arms, half teasing. You're here again? If you want to hide from me, I'll leave immediately, Ethan said, half joking but with real vulnerability in his eyes. Grace laughed. Come in, it's snowing. He stepped inside, brushing snow off his shoulders. The apartment felt warmer instantly. Mia rushed out. Mr. Ethan, it's snowing. Let's make a snowman. Ethan lifted her into his arms. If your mom says yes. Grace pretended to scold. You're really going to let her drag you outside while I stay here doing laundry? I can help with laundry, Ethan replied casually. Grace froze. No man had ever said something like that to her. Not as a gesture of pity, but with genuine intent. She finally smiled softly. Go, but put a hat on her. Outside, the snow thickened. Ethan crouched beside Mia, helping her pack snow into small spheres. Together, they built a tiny but adorable snowman. Grace watched through the window, hands cupped around a warm mug. She didn't look away. From the way Ethan knelt patiently, placing a knit hat on the snowman, from the way Mia laughed until she fell into his arms, from the way Ethan hugged her as if holding something precious. Grace exhaled, a breath that held both joy and fear. She knew she was falling for him, but she was still afraid. That night, after Mia fell asleep, Grace and Ethan sat at the small kitchen table. The soft yellow light wrapped around them like a blanket. Ethan, Grace began, I know you're trying. I see all of it. But you're still scared, Ethan finished gently. Grace nodded. I don't have anything. I can't give you a fancy life. I don't belong in your world. Ethan shook his head. Grace, I don't want fancy. I want peace. And I only find peace here, with you and Mia. Grace swallowed hard. You're sure? Ethan stood, moved to her side, and placed his hand lightly over hers. Everything good in my life began the moment I met you two, and I'm not going anywhere. After a long while, Grace whispered, Ethan, thank you for staying. He squeezed her hand gently. I'm not staying, Grace. I'm beginning. And in that moment, as snow thickened outside, a warm winter quietly bloomed inside the tiny apartment. Time passed so quickly that Grace often found herself startled. It had been almost 1 full year since the Christmas night she met Ethan, when Mia grabbed his sleeve and unknowingly connected 3 lives forever. Now, nearly 12 months had passed. Ethan came to the small Brooklyn apartment almost every evening. Every Sunday, he walked with Grace and Mia to the park. And as winter returned, colder than last year, Grace's heart felt warmer than ever. Then, just 2 days before Christmas, everything quietly shifted toward a moment she never dared to dream of. That night, the wind slammed against the windows as snow piled along the street. Mia was asleep in the bedroom. Ethan sat on the couch, fixing the small knit scarf he had bought for her. Grace stood by the window, watching the Christmas lights flicker over the rooftops. Ethan approached and placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. You've been quiet all evening. What's on your mind? Grace smiled softly. I was just thinking, a year ago, around this exact time, you were a sad stranger at a restaurant. Ethan chuckled. And you were the exhausted mother chasing a very energetic kid. Grace touched his hand. But things change fast, don't they? Ethan looked at her, deeply, steadily. Grace, I don't want things to just change. I want them to last. I want them to become forever. Grace blinked, confused, until Ethan stepped back slightly and reached into his coat pocket. Her heart jolted. What was he doing? He took a long, trembling breath. Grace, almost a year has passed, a year in which my life finally meant something, because of you and Mia. He spoke slowly, each word brushing against her heart. I've thought about this for a long time, and I know I don't want to be here just tonight or this Christmas. I want to be here for the rest of my life. Grace raised a hand to her mouth, breath catching. Ethan knelt down. He opened a small box, a simple silver ring, elegant and honest, just like her. Grace Jenkins, will you marry me? Her tears answered before her voice did. Ethan, oh my God, yes, yes, of course yes. Ethan rose and pulled her into his arms, holding her as if afraid she might disappear. She held him back, her whole body trembling from happiness she never thought she deserved. Mia woke up from the noise and ran out. Mom, Mr. Ethan, what happened? Grace picked her up. Sweetheart, Mr. Ethan wants to be our family. Mia gasped. For real? He wants to be my dad? Ethan laughed and hugged both of them. If you want me to. I want it, Mia squealed. And just 1 week later, on the first day of the new year, inside a small Brooklyn church, they held a simple wedding, beautiful in a way money could never recreate. Grace wore a modest white dress and an old pair of shoes kept spotless. Ethan waited for her at the altar in a plain suit. No luxury, but eyes shining, like this was the greatest moment of his life. Mia, the flower girl, tossed petals with dramatic enthusiasm. As Grace walked down the aisle, Ethan whispered, You're so beautiful I can't breathe. She laughed through tears. I never imagined I'd marry a man like you. Ethan squeezed her hand, voice low and warm. and I never imagined I'd find my home in a small Brooklyn apartment. The priest smiled and spoke gently. "I now pronounce you husband and wife." Grace and Ethan kissed, soft, slow, and deep enough to last a lifetime. Beside them, Mia jumped excitedly. "We're married. We're really a family now." As they stepped out of the church, snow swirled around them like blessings. Ethan held Grace's hand, and with the other he held Mia's. And the three of them, as if written by fate, walked together into a new future, warm as the very first Christmas night they met.